Hello, and welcome to the second episode of the How Kung Fu Changed My Life podcast. Today we have Sifu Wong Pui Yee, one of the most experienced Wing Chun practitioners in the world. She runs Central Wing Chun in Hong Kong with her partner, and you can check her out at central_Wing Chun on Instagram. I hope you enjoy the program.
Okay, well, yeah, welcome to the show. Thank you very much. So, today we have Wong Sifu. How do I say your full name?
Wong Pui Yee.
Wong Pui. Okay, and so yes, for people who don't know, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, that kind of thing.
Okay, so my name is Wong Pui Yee. So I'm teaching Wing Chun. I have been teaching Wing Chun for many, many years. If I quickly talk about how I started Wing Chun, is that I'm original from Denmark. I look Chinese. I am like Chinese, but I'm original from Denmark. I started my martial art journey back in 1993, back in Odense, which is a city that probably no one knows about, except for that Hans Christian Andersen was born there.
Oh, nice.
Uh, yes, so I started my martial art journey with my first Sifu, who is Morten Ibsen. So,
Okay, yeah.
and yes, so he has, back then, he was not the only teacher. He was along with another one called Frank. In Danish, it's called Frank. English is Frank. But he stopped sometime later. So actually, I learned my basic Wing Chun, everything from Sifu Morten Ibsen. So
Mm.
he's known to be a tough guy, good
Yeah,
guy,
he's
and very
very good.
technical.
Yeah.
Yes. So I trained in Odense for a few years. So what happened in Denmark back then was that they started something for the government in Denmark for you young people, for the youth, to do something different with the support of the government. And what happened was that in 1997 they started a full-time Wing Chun course in Copenhagen, which was the headquarter of Wing Chun in Denmark. Actually, it was called Wing Chun Scandinavia because it was the headquarter of the whole Scandinavia. So what happened in 1997, I was around 20 years old. I was supposed to study Chinese at university,
Mm.
and I got in, but because I heard about the full-time Wing Chun instructor course, I decided to actually postpone going to university and decided that I would travel to Copenhagen, find a place to live, and then study full-time for a year before I go to university. So that was my decision. I went. My parents was, of course, they were not really happy about it, but at
Wow.
the end they supported me because I decided this is what I'm going to do. I moved to Copenhagen. In beginning, I stayed with friends of my parents, and then I rented a small room to stay at. And then I started to do full-time Wing Chun learning. Back then it was 5 hours a day, Monday to Friday. There was a lot involved. It was not only Wing Chun as such. You learn about also physical conditioning, weight training, and also nutrition and all of that. And then I became. Did I bec? That was 1997. I became instructor in 1999. After 1 year of studying, I also went to the Eskrima course. They added on a full-time course for Eskrima. That was the second year. So in 1999, I became instructor at the headquarters of Wing Chun in Copenhagen. It was a
Mm.
very large martial arts school. I think probably the largest one in the world, at least back then, with more than 1,000 members. Very
Wow.
big. It was around 1,400 square meters. Must be.
Hmm.
That was really, really a huge one, almost in city center of Copenhagen. So I continued my training, and then I started university in 2020. Sorry about the noise. This is Hong
No,
Kong. It's
Hong Kong.
always noisy. Yeah. And then I started in studying at university, continue my practice, and then I started working there too as a receptionist.
Uh-huh.
And then I worked there for many years until I became the manager. So I was managing the studio there until 2007, when Martin and I went to Martin. Is a good friend of mine. He's also teaching now in Denmark.
Oh, well, before
So
I get to the Hong Kong, tell me a little bit more about like why, because there's not everyone that gives up a whole, university degree to go and, become a martial arts instructor. I mean, tell me about, what was, what motivated you to do that? Why was it such a strong pull to do that?
I think for me, I thought of it as a very, very good opportunity to really deepen your training in Wing Chun and focus and understanding of it, because you, rather than going like a hobby training, you could actually go full-time training. And of course, it's a matter of priority. So I did prioritize Wing Chun more than going studying. And also culture-wise, especially you're from the Europe too, you know that we tend to be a bit different than Asians in general, having
Sure.
Asian grown up in Asia, where competition is strong, and you're getting too old to go out and work and study or whatever. Everything has to be as early as possible. But Denmark is very liberal. Even when I started studying, my oldest classmate was in her 60s. So for us back then, it's more follow your dreams, do what you like, and all of that. It might not be the best because sometimes you need to be pushed, and also you need to be ambitious. But that is how I grew up. Just do what, follow what your heart tells you to do. So, so that's why I did it. If you ask me now whether I regret I did that or not, I do not. But there's a lot of things that probably could have been better. Maybe I would not have choose that kind of study. Maybe go into other things. But it turns out very good in the end. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot I'd like to ask you about. I could go in many different
Yes.
directions, but tell me a bit more about, you seem to have a sort of one foot as a European and one foot as an Asian. Would you say that's correct? Like that you have a sort of mix of the two cultures?
Yes. Of course, because at home, my parents are more Chinese. And we speak Cantonese. And outside, all my friends, when I was a kid, since I was a kid, they were mainly Danish, a few Asians, a few Chinese. So when I visited Chinese, then we become more Chinese. Once you play around with your Danish friends, you become more Danish. I would say that when I was younger, I felt more Dane. But when I grew older, I'm more attracted to the Asian culture, and also because now I live in Hong Kong. And then there's a lot of things that you started adjusting to the culture here. A lot of it makes sense. I mean, a lot of it I've experienced when I was younger, but I just did not completely adapt to it. But slowly in Hong Kong, I started adapting to the local culture, if you have to say it like that. When it came to Hong Kong, I talked very open-minded and also very freely, and I realized that something. It's not always something that you should do, and it's not to say that the culture here is very conservative, but people tend to care more about it, like in ways that you don't hurt other people, and also it's also about manners, where I used to
Right.
be very, very direct because of my Danish thinking makes you very direct. I just
Sure.
realized back then it's about being honest, being about what you talk about, but I realized nowadays it's not always about that. It's always about how the other people see it, and also their feelings, and are you hurting people with your words just because you want to be honest? All of this makes me probably a bit more Asian now than I used to
Right.
be, right? Because when I was with my Danish friends, we can be very honest with each other, and they would just talk back to you, right? But
Sure.
sometimes when we try to do that, we don't know whether we actually hurting each other's feeling or so on. And probably you also know that because you lived in Hong Kong before too. So you know that too is a bit different than British culture,
Yeah.
Hong Kong culture too.
I,
So
I
it's just
mean, British
adjusting a bit.
also is, yeah, I mean, British, they can also be very polite. Or it's
Yes,
funny you
yes,
say that. I mean, if you take it Chinese, I mean, it's very hard to say Chinese, or let's just say Hong Kong, compare it
yeah,
to Japanese. I find Hong Kong people are more expressive. The Japanese and the British, actually, maybe because they're island nations, can be quite, have certain ways of doing things. Okay, you have to do it like this. But actually, and also Danish and in sometimes Dutch people that I know can also be more direct. And sometimes for
yes.
British people, it can be a little bit like, oh, wow,
Yes,
okay,
yes, I
So
know that.
yeah.
I know that, and it's also things that I learned with time. I remember I texted John. You remember John?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I want to say something to him, and then I'm like, that very Danish. Instead of saying, "Hi, John, how are you? How have you been?" or whatever, I just said like, "Hi, John, I'm letting you know, blah 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 blah." And the first thing he wrote back is that, "Hello, Pui Yee, I hope you're well too." And then I understood, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Something has, yeah. I used to be like very Danish in that sense. And then in Hong Kong, there are certain things that if you want to request something, or it's not about always about being right,
Sure.
and that I learned also at the Wing Chun school in Hong Kong, right?
Mm,
Sometimes it's not about arguing with people, whatever he said or she said or the master said, and then the master the next day forgot about it, and then you're reminding him about it. It's
mm.
not about that, right? Yeah, it's
Yeah,
more about
no,
catching the essence rather than being right about things. So yeah, but that is why my very very Danish way of seeing things. And it really works in Denmark because, Danish people are very open and talking about a lot of things, able to not criticize, but point out certain things about each other. But here, if you want to do it, just you do it in a more polite way, right?
sure. Well,
Yes,
that's the thing is there's benefits and downsides to both, like you say,
yes,
because you want to
yes,
get to the essence of something. You want to get to the
yeah,
truth, but
yeah,
but how you get to the truth is important. Like you say, it's not
yes,
just direct get to the truth. It's like how I do it is important. I have to consider that. But at the same time, if you're too polite, then and in Japan, I would say is the most extreme version of that. Like
yeah,
sometimes it can be difficult to get to the truth because people are so worried about how they will be viewed, or if people will be make them feel bad and things like that. So I think you sounds like you have a good balance of understanding both cultures,
y- yes, yeah, 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 and getting better at it. Let's say like that.
Yeah. So all right, let's go back to your journey. So you're with Martin, of course I know Martin. And so what made you want to, I mean, first of all, I thought it was amazing that there was even a full-time Wing Chun instructor course. I mean, that kind of blows my mind. It's like, I can't even,
Yes, yeah,
maybe one day that will happen again. You never know. Like universities,
yeah,
they're pretty stretched these days. They need to come up with some better ideas. So you never know. That might be something that they consider.
yeah.
But
But it was not like it was not university level. It was just
right.
something that was offered by the government, not specifically Wing Chun only. It could be anything else,
Ah,
right? If you had a
interesting.
good
Okay.
idea, you could present, and
I
then they accepted
see.
it. It's more for the youth to do something that you have a group of people that are stuck in between whether what they should study, right?
Right.
Should you do like this, or not everyone going to university or whatever, but they have a group of people that's stuck somewhere, so they want to give them some skills. So of course,
I
I'm not
see.
that because I was supposed to go to university. But it's open for everyone. So I decided that so I also decided to join that school. Yes.
I mean, the one thing I do want to sort of jump off at that point where you and Martin, seek out,
Yes.
other options. But before that, I don't feel like I really understand why you like martial arts. I mean, for example, I was beaten up a couple of times when I was young, or I had some difficulties, in my family, and I felt like I didn't really enjoy sports, but I enjoyed self-defense. I mean, what is it about martial arts that you feel, is important for you?
For me, it was culture. It was definitely culture.
Uh-huh.
And when I was a kid, around maybe probably 8, 9, 10 years old, at home we watch a lot of kung fu movies, a lot of kung fu dramas from Hong Kong. And because we lived in Denmark, we were renting videos. And back then it was a few years delay from actually the Hong Kong. So I watched a lot of kung fu dramas, and I was really fascinated. It was like it was all good against evil. It was very Chinese, and I mainly remembered because I listened to a lot of Cantonese through TV, so I was better at understanding than actually speaking Cantonese. And it was through that I really was fascinated by Kung Fu. It was very Chinese to me because I lived in a place where there were very few Chinese people, but that was just so Chinese for me. So I always wanted to do Kung Fu just because of that. Not because I wanted to fight, protect myself or whatever. It was none of that. It was just that that's Chinese. I just want to be something
Mm.
that is Chinese. Yeah.
Wow. So he's connecting you to your ancestry, basically.
Yes, yeah. So
Mm.
and it was just something with it being, the is and especially kung fu movies. It's so obvious. There's a bad guy, there's a good guy, and the good
Yeah.
guy is just all good, and the bad guy is just all bad. But just something like that, I was really attracted to, and then it was just kung fu. It was just very Chinese. So
Mm.
so since I was around 8, 9, 10, I was fascinated by kung fu. So I didn't start before 93. I was was I 16? I think I was
16.
around 16. Yeah, 16, 15, something like that. Yeah. Yes.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. Yeah. I mean, again, I wonder if because I'm a lot with this podcast. I'm interested in why people study kung fu. What it is about kung fu that is attractive to people. And I think
Yeah.
like I, for example, didn't. I don't really watch kung fu movies. I don't know much about kung fu movies. I started Wing Chun because I googled that Wing Chun was learned by Bruce Lee. I'd heard of Bruce Lee, but I wasn't like a kung fu movie buff or something. Whereas you
Yeah.
and I know some other instructors, really were immersed in the kind of cinematic or the televisual representation of kung fu. But for you, it seems not just kung fu, but also just the stories, the kind of folk tales, Chinese folk tales as well, seem to be kind of important
Yes.
for you. So that's fantastic. Yeah. All right. So again, so you've done this course. So what is it now that you're like? Okay, Martin, we need to go to China. We need to find more. Like, why did you guys choose to do that?
Actually, we did it, plan to go to Hong Kong because, yeah, unfortunately, it's always like that. Our school was actually slowly breaking down a bit. And we used to follow one lineage, which was the Leung Ting lineage. But probably you also know that that very strong lineage in Europe, it started splitting up to smaller schools with the head not being Leung Ting anymore, and that
Mm,
was the same thing that happened in Denmark. So where we were supposed to be under Leung Ting and Keith Kansbeck. And sorry for not saying Sifu in front of them. It's just that when I'm mentioning, it's just the names.
sure.
Yeah. So we decided in Denmark to no longer follow that lineage, So split it up. And what happened during that time is that some instructors left. Some followed this person, another, some followed this person. And then for Martin and I, we really wanted to preserve the school in Denmark. That sounds really weird, as we're both today no longer associated with the Langtang school or the Danish school anymore. But back then, we really wanted to preserve it and then also maybe get some new ideas back from Asia to bring back to Denmark. So when we traveled to Hong Kong, we didn't have in mind, as other people did, to look for new masters and follow another master. For us, we just, what can we do to support the school back in Denmark? And then we said we just want to seek the roots of Wing Chun, travel to China, meet the different masters, interview them, understand a bit more about. And back then, also, I have to say that we thought that we were the best still, right? It was both that. We're still the best. We have the best system. We have all of that. Everyone leaving makes no sense. Why are people not more supportive of what we do and so on? And then also then when we actually left to Hong Kong and China, most of the time we felt that our system is better, right? We want new ideas. We are open for that. But we are very, very confident in our own interpretation of Wing Chun, that way that we learned Wing Chun. And that changed when we came to Hong Kong. But before that, our plan was just to interview culture. It was culture, more not seeking new masters. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I was about to say it's sort of, again, I think that's where your Danish confidence comes in, and then it's a good thing. You're like, you have to, in a way that maybe again British people would be too like, oh, I'm not sure, this. I mean, you know what
Yeah.
John's like, But I like that. I
Yeah.
like that. We're good, but let's see what else is out there. Yes, from a cultural point of view, but I'm sure there was a part of you that thought like, well, you never know.
Yeah.
There might be someone out there that means we have to think about our system or think about the way we
Yeah.
do things. Because you're obviously open-minded. It's confident, but
Yeah.
you must be open-minded because otherwise you wouldn't do that. Okay, so you go to Hong Kong, you're interviewing different masters. Tell me what happened then.
Martin and I, we decided to see if we could actually interview, take a private lesson. If it was possible, and then go to China and see the different masters. And so the first few ones we met, we thought that they're skilled, but yeah, we still preferred our own style. And I also have to say that it's because back then our school in Denmark, really large one with a lot of students, many instructors, we ran more than 50 classes a week, more than 40 instructors, everyone really pretty strong, and many of them were bouncers and things like that. So you have such a solid base, you would think that, oh, we are the best. This is the best system. Nothing can change our mind. And then when we went to Hong Kong, the first few ones, we were like, yeah, they're good, but it's not something that was really impressive. So, and then we met Master Wan Gam Leung, and that was what changed our mindset. And it was very simple. Martin did the private classes, and I was the translator. And the first thing that was really actually very, very impressive was that his English punch. And you probably know that, James, because you also studied with Wan Sifu before. And then we thought it was really good. And then, but at that time, we were actually meeting with some of the local instructors from the Learning system in Hong Kong and train with them outside the school. Everything was a bit secretive and so on. And they were good too. right? They were also good.
Mm.
And for us, compared to the learning system and the one gum learning system, they're very quite different. The understanding of the center line, and all of that. It was a big change for us. But we started slowly understand and see that it's very different. Maybe it's probably a bit better. But
Mm.
then we had to go to China. So we went to China and met different masters there. And we liked it. I would say it's probably today, when I'm more mature and also a bit older, I probably would tend to appreciate more um, the masters from China. Back then, it was more about like, oh, they're not as good as our style in Denmark. Then, yeah, it's interesting, but it's not like really, really impressive. But today, it's more about your interpretation of Wing Chun. So we were not that impressed back then. We were in China.
Mm.
I think I probably would see it differently today if I travel to China and probably meet a lot of more and see more things behind the explanation of Wing Chun. But back then, Martin and I was like, no, just go back to Hong Kong. And then we went back to Hong Kong. We trained with one Sifu, and we were really, really impressed by them, by him. He was really, really powerful. And his explanation of Wing Chun really attracted us. But we had to go back to Denmark. And then we went back to Denmark. We talked a lot about it, what to do. And Martin, who is also really actually mature, he actually said, what should we do? Because he felt, and me too, that we couldn't go back to our other system and back to our old school. So he's the more mature one among us two. So he went to our Sifu back then in Denmark, said, okay, this is the case. What do you think I should do? And then our Sifu back then said that just follow what you think is correct. And then this is what he did. In the beginning, it was like a transition from trying. The first thing he tried to do, Martin, was to go back and convince them that this system is better. And then because he couldn't, so he actually let it up to them to decide. And then we decided to just leave our school for many, many years. And that was in 2007. So it was after 14 years. Is it 14 years? Sorry, it must be right. Yeah, 14 years of learning Wing Chun, that we decided to follow one Sifu in Hong Kong. And I was studying at university, so it was actually easy for me to travel back and forth. And Martin did his best. He was working at that time. So whenever he had a holiday, he invested his time in Hong Kong. And then all of that went through a few years like that. So every time I was in Hong Kong, I tried to stay at least for 3 months or half year because I was still studying. And then after I finished studying, I decided that, don't go out and look for a job yet. It took me quite a long time. I don't know if I should feel ashamed about it, but it took me 10 years to finish my studies. It was supposed to be 6 years, but it took me 10 years. It was actually writing my final essay. That was the one that took a few years. But I finished in 2010, and because my dad passed away, actually the same night I finished my essay, he passed away in 2010. Yeah, and then we had to do like ceremonial funeral in back in Vietnam where he was born. So, and then after that, I I went to Vietnam, and then I went to Hong Kong for some time, and then I said to myself, let's just train a bit more before going back to Denmark and get a job. But then in 2011, I was actually offered to go to Shanghai to work for one Sifu students who was a Singaporean. He wanted to open a Wing Chun school, a rather luxurious one in Shanghai. So
Oh, I
I
remember that.
decided
Yeah, I
to,
remember you going.
yes, go that direction with Kleber and Robert.
I hear.
And
Well, wait,
Kleber,
one sec. Because I know
yeah,
that this is a whole nother story. But
yeah,
just to go back one step. So obviously you said the inch punch was impressive, but surely there
yes,
must have been more. Not to him. I know he's a big personality and he's very charismatic. But what about the system itself? Because that's a big jump. If you've got like
yes,
40 instructors and then you're just
yes,
willing to kind of say goodbye, that again, it comes back to this idea of integrity that I feel that you have a lot, where you could choose the easy route. You could have chosen university. Instead, you chose to study Wing Chun against, your parents' wishes. You could have chosen to stay with WT. You didn't. You could have chosen to keep your school. You know what I mean? Like every step, you've
yes,
always taken the harder route because you feel it's not right. Do you know what I mean? Like there's an
yes.
integrity thing going on. So, but just tell me a bit more about what it is about the system that you were like, oh no, this we can't ignore this. We have to go with this. Tell me a bit more.
Yes. First, it was the students itself. When we went there, most of the students in at the school in Hong Kong, they haven't practiced for like many years, but it was difficult to actually handle it. Them. That
Right.
was one.
Okay.
I will not say like Martin and I, we couldn't protect ourselves, but we were actually pretty impressed by the skills, even for students who trained 1, 2, 3 years. And then, and also with the logic of the system about the centerline theory, the way the stands were designed, instead of weight shifting, just completely controlling the middle, instead of the main one of the main difference is of course how they understand the center line and how we used to understand the center line. So we were always deflecting incoming force by leaning to the side, moving away from the center line. But for their system, it's actually moving everything away from the center line. It's actually taking over center line. So it's a very big difference than when we are. The way of deflecting power was also very different. So there's a lot of things. The understanding of the center line is completely different. It's not to say that which one works better. It's just that for us, it would make more sense. It's about controlling over the center line. Even everyone talks about Wing Chun always talk about controlling the center line, but the traditional way was always about deflecting energy, moving to the side, and here in this system, it was completely about moving your opponent away from the middle instead. And then the way the forms were designed was also completely different. The form, which today I still explain to my students, what is a form? A form is very simple. It's just that if I teach you a technique, I can call it one, teach you a second technique, call it two, and then when I start teaching you the above 10 techniques, you start forgetting the first technique. So how do we cope with that? It's very simple. You put all the techniques in a fixed sequence, which then becomes a form, and this is your whole alphabet. But what usually, not only in Wing Chun, but other styles of martial arts tend to have a lot of forms and a lot of techniques in the forms. But then when you apply it, you actually don't exactly apply it like you would do in the form. And that was one thing that was very specific with the school of Wan Gam Leung. It was that all the things from you start your stance to you learn every single technique in the form to how you apply it in T-Sao to how you apply it in other drills were exactly the same. and that was really, really impressive. It was really that was something that I've not seen from any other masters. All of their techniques were more like an interpretation of how you would apply the technique. But in this school, you applied exactly in the form, you learned it in the form. This is how you apply in real life, in your T-cell drill, everything. So that was very interesting. Even if it's very simple in T-cell, your Phục Sao in your form and your Bong Sao in your form is and your Tan Sao is exactly how you would apply in T Sao. And that will make the system complete. I would say like it's a complete system that you will not do a Tan Sao in your form like that. And then you T Sao, you use your Tan Sao differently. So it's a complete system for me. That's how I see that system.
Yeah, I think that was something that also was important to me. Like you say, is the form becomes so much more meaningful when
Yes,
there's more transfer from the form to what you're actually doing in Chi Sao, or San
yes,
Sao, obviously, if you're drilling. Because, like you say, one Sifu's obsessions, I would say, was to, refine the form based on how he felt the technique could be improved in practice, and Sat Yong, obviously,
yes.
practical Wing Chun.
Right, yeah,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, so I know you haven't got lots of time, and we've only done like a tiny portion of your story, so I don't want to cram it in. So I don't know, maybe we could do a part two or something, and I'll make a
yes,
note about the
yeah.
Shanghai is kind of where the bookmark where we are with your story, because it's
Okay,
I
yes,
don't want to rush things, because I think it's very useful for people to, your life is very, in a way, unusual to the average person. Not everyone,
yeah,
like I say, takes choices that you've taken. And
yeah,
obviously you've had some recent new things, over the past year or two, that are exciting that I don't want to just
yes,
brush over. So, would you be up for doing maybe a second part? No, it doesn't have
yeah,
to be soon, but like in a few weeks or something, and then we can go
yeah,
more into, because
yes.
I don't want to rush things, because I think it's super
Okay,
interesting for people to hear.
okay. Yes, no problem. I would love to.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. All right, well, yeah, thank you very much, Sifu. And like I say, we will, hopefully people get a lot out of this, and yeah, we will catch up soon.
Okay.
Thank you very much for listening and stay tuned for part 2.